We are some of many parts. Want y'all listening to just pay attention because it's the cheapest price any of you can pay.
To prove ourselves live on stage. How do you prove yourself with turntables and a unit on stage?
Rappers who were terrified of Public Enemy. That's not hyperbole. When Chuck D, Flav, and the Bomb Squad arrived in 1987, they didn't just change hip-hop, they terrified it. Everybody knows Public Enemy were legendary, revolutionary even, but nobody talks about how their rise sent shockwaves of fear through the industry. Hit that subscribe button, because if you're interested in the untold stories of hip-hop history, the moments that shape the culture behind the scenes, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Hip-hop in the mid-1980s was fun. It was about parties, breakdancing, and making people smile. Groups like the Fat Boys dominated this era with their lighter, party-focused rap. They built their careers on humor, food jokes, and the human beatbox. They were safe, non-threatening, the kind of act that could get mainstream commercial success because they weren't challenging anyone. They made hip-hop feel like a recreational activity, a soundtrack for escapism. And for a while, that worked. The measure of a rapper back then was simple. Could you move a crowd? Could you make people dance? Could you provide a break from the struggles of everyday life? The Fat Boys excelled at this. They were kings of the novelty lane. Then Public Enemy showed up and burned that entire lane to the ground. Public Enemy introduced something hip-hop had never seen before, an explicit focus on systemic issues. They weren't rapping about food or parties. They were rapping about police brutality, the prison industrial complex, and media manipulation. They used hip-hop as a tool for political agitation and historical revisionism. And suddenly, the Fat Boys' entire identity felt childish. The contrast was devastating when the audience's appetite shifted from songs about eating to songs like Rebel Without a Pause. Artists providing party rap weren't just out of style. They were seen as relics of a less enlightened time. Public Enemy redefined the genre's serious potential, and in doing so, they drew a line in the sand. On one side was the serious, the political, the relevant. On the other side was the trivial, the party-focused, the obsolete. The Fat Boys found themselves stranded on the wrong side of that line. And here's the brutal part. They couldn't pivot. A group built on humor and novelty cannot subtly embrace intense political ferocity without appearing fake. They were trapped in a box that Public Enemy had crushed. The intimidation they felt wasn't about losing a rap battle. It was about realizing the market had moved on without them. The party was officially over. The seriousness of the new era demanded artists who could speak to the crack epidemic, to systemic racism, to the realities Black communities were facing, topics that were completely foreign to the Fat Boys brand. They were stuck playing the jester in a room full of activists, and that fear, that realization of irrelevance, was terrifying. Public Enemy made party rap seem subtly trivial and less relevant. The Fat Boys became a punchline in a genre that had stopped laughing. But the Fat Boys weren't the only ones feeling the heat. LL Cool J, the massive Def Jam star, the commercial center of hip-hop, was watching Public Enemy rise on the same label he called home, and he was nervous. LL Cool J had built his career on a specific formula, aggressive battle rapping mixed with romance, boasting about his lyrical skills, his gold chains, his romantic conquests. He was the blueprint for the solo rap superstar, the flagship artist of Def Jam, the guy who proved hip-hop could generate long-term careers. He was the sun around which the rest of the label orbited. His dominance was unchallenged for years. Then Public Enemy arrived with their intense political ferocity, and LL Cool J's entire approach started to feel hollow. Public Enemy didn't attack LL directly. They didn't need to. They attacked the vacuum of meaning that his style of rap often inhabited. By presenting themselves as a paramilitary unit with the S1Ws, by functioning as the Black CNN, Public Enemy created a stark, challenging contrast between entertainer and activist. And in that contrast, LL Cool J looked like the entertainer, just the entertainer. Public Enemy shifted the criteria for what it meant to be hard. Before PE, being hard meant being a tough individual from the street. After PE, being hard meant being mentally equipped to dismantle the system. LL Cool J, for all his physical presence and lyrical skill, was fundamentally an entertainer, performing for an audience. Public Enemy were activists fighting for a cause. The fact that both artists shared Def Jam made everything worse. The internal competition was fierce, and Public Enemy's ascent threatened LL Cool J's position as the label's top priority. Public Enemy instantly raised the stakes for the entire Def Jam roster. The fear LL Cool J experienced was the fear of being dethroned not by sales, but by significance. He risked being viewed as the commercial sellout compared to Public Enemy's authentic revolutionary stance. And this anxiety showed up in his music. When LL released Walking with a Panther, he tried to adopt some Black Panther iconography, likely as a reaction to Public Enemy's influence while keeping his commercial sound. The criticism he received for that album, that it was too pop-oriented, validated every fear he had. Public Enemy had changed the weather, and LL Cool J was caught in the storm, struggling to reconcile his identity as a massive star with the new demand for political substance. The pressure was suffocating. Every interview became a minefield. Every new single was scrutinized against Public Enemy's standard. LL found himself defending his artistry in ways he never had to before. The Beastie Boys felt it too. They had just released License to Ill, the best-selling rap album of the 1980s. But their persona was defined by early, often goofy material, tales of drinking, fighting for the right to party, juvenile rebellion. While they were commercially massive, their artistic credibility within the core hip-hop community was always questionable. Many viewed them as interlopers or a novelty act, despite their genuine roots in New York's downtown art scene. Then Public Enemy brought profound political gravity to Def Jam. The contrast between the Beastie Boys' lyrics about brass monkeys and Chuck D's lyrics about the prison industrial complex was jarring and uncomfortable. The Beastie Boys' material was overshadowed by this new gravity. The intimidation here was intellectual. They were smart enough to recognize that their goofy persona was unsustainable in the face of Public Enemy's militancy. They understood that if they continued down their current path, they would be dismissed as clowns in a genre that was becoming deadly serious. Public Enemy raised the stakes for everyone on Def Jam. The baseline for acceptance had shifted. It was no longer enough to sell records. You had to contribute something meaningful to the culture. The Beastie Boys, terrified of being permanently labeled as a joke, reacted by fundamentally altering their entire approach. Fearing the loss of respect from peers like Chuck D, who had championed them, despite their differences, the Beastie Boys abandoned the frat rap formula completely. They fled to Los Angeles and created Paul's Boutique, matching the dense production of the Bomb Squad with their own kaleidoscope of samples. The fear of Public Enemy's shadow drove them to prove they were serious musicians. But that fear, that constant pressure to measure up, came at a cost. They lost their commercial momentum temporarily, sacrificing immediate success for long-term credibility. Even the pioneers weren't safe. Afrika Bambaataa, one of the founding fathers of hip-hop, one of the three kings of the Bronx who helped birth the culture, watched as Public Enemy declared war on the musical structure of the genre itself. Bambaataa's contribution was the electro-funk sound, a fusion of Kraftwerk, funk, and Afrofuturism. For years, this sound defined the cutting edge. It was high-tech, synthetic, focused on peace, love, unity, and having fun. But Public Enemy's production team, the Bomb Squad, created something entirely different. Their sound was groundbreaking, dense, and chaotic. They layered samples upon samples, utilized dissonance, incorporated non-musical noises like sirens and squeals to create urgency and anxiety. This new sonic architecture redefined the cutting edge. For pioneers like Afrika Bambaataa, this was terrifying. The dense and chaotic sound of Public Enemy made the clean, drum machine-driven tracks of the early 80s sound thin and antiquated. Technology had leaped forward, driven by the sampling capabilities of new equipment, and the Bomb Squad were the masters of this domain. Groups who didn't evolve their sound and message to match this new intensity risked being deemed obsolete. That was the source of the intimidation for the pioneers. It's the classic anxiety of the innovator who sees the next generation take the tool they invented and use it in ways they never imagined. Bambaataa and his contemporaries faced a brutal choice: adapt to the new intensity or be relegated to history. Public Enemy's authoritative lyrics and aggressive sound signaled the end of the old school era. The fear wasn't just about selling fewer records. It was about being erased from the conversation of contemporary relevance. The peace, love, unity ethos seemed naive in the face of Public Enemy's prophets of rage. The genre they built had grown teeth, and now it was eating his parents. But Public Enemy's intimidation factor extended beyond hip-hop. Scott Ian, guitarist for the thrash metal band Anthrax, experienced it firsthand. Anthrax collaborated with Public Enemy on a remake of Bring the Noise, a seminal moment that predated the NU metal explosion. Despite being a successful musician in his own right, Ian's experience with Public Enemy was defined by acute intimidation. He explicitly stated that knowing he had to rap the third verse in front of Chuck D was intimidating. This fear stemmed from Chuck D's immense vocal and intellectual authority. Ian viewed Chuck D as the greatest rapper of all time. That created severe imposter syndrome. Ian was stepping into a space where Chuck D was the absolute master. This example illustrates just how transcendent Public Enemy's power was. Their intellectual authority commanded deference, even from established rock stars. Chuck D's voice, booming and authoritative, demanded perfection. The fear here was the fear of disrespecting the art form in the presence of its highest practitioner. Ian knew Public Enemy did not tolerate mediocrity. To rap in front of Chuck D was to be audited by the ultimate judge of rhythm and rhyme. Public Enemy's intimidation factor wasn't limited to their direct competition in hip-hop. It extended to anyone who entered their orbit. They radiated a seriousness that made even heavy metal musicians who built entire careers on aggression feel small and inadequate. So what made Public Enemy so intimidating? 3 things. First, thematic intimidation. By focusing on systemic issues and political ferocity, they devalued party rap and boasting. This hit the Fat Boys and LL Cool J hard, forcing them to confront the sudden perceived shallowness of their content. Second, sonic intimidation. By utilizing dense, chaotic production, they raised the technical bar for what a hip-hop record should sound like. This affected the pioneers like Bambaataa and groups like the Beastie Boys, forcing a complete re-evaluation of production values. Third, authoritative intimidation. Chuck D projected immense vocal and intellectual authority, establishing a hierarchy of competence. This affected collaborators like Scott Ian and peers across the board who felt the weight of his judgment. The release of It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back in 1988 was the pivot point for all these anxieties. Before this album, the industry allowed for multiple standards of success. After this album, the Public Enemy standard became the primary lens through which critical validity was judged. The fear these artists felt was the intuitive understanding that the rules had changed overnight. Public Enemy had weaponized hip-hop. Those who were still playing games, whether it was the Fat Boys with their buffoonery or LL Cool G with his love ballads, suddenly realized they were standing on a battlefield without protection. For those who couldn't adapt like the Fat Boys and many pioneers, the fear was a harbinger of the end. Public Enemy's explicit focus on systemic issues and groundbreaking production rendered them trivial, less relevant, and obsolete. But here's the thing, that fear, as brutal and crushing as it was, ultimately pushed the culture forward. The intimidation Public Enemy created wasn't just destructive, it was transformative. The Beastie Boys responded to the pressure by creating Paul's Boutique, a masterpiece of density and innovation that's now considered one of the greatest albums ever made. LL Cool J eventually hardened his image and released Mama Side Knock You Out, proving he could survive and thrive in the new era with one of his most powerful records. Scott Ian successfully delivered his verse, helping to birth the rap metal genre that would dominate the 90s and influence countless bands. Public Enemy didn't just terrify their peers, they challenged them to be better, to dig deeper, to matter more. And while some artists fell by the wayside, unable to adapt to the new standard, the ones who rose to meet the challenge created some of the most important music in hip-hop history. The fear became fuel for evolution. Which artists do you think handled Public Enemy's rise the best? Did LL Cool J's comeback prove he could match their intensity? Or did the Beastie Boys' complete reinvention show true artistic courage? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you made it this far, hit that like button and subscribe, because we've got plenty more untold hip-hop stories coming your way.